Hey everybody, this week we're going to be taking a look at a Swampert deck from the 2004 meta. So starting off here, we play 4 copies of Dunsparce. Dunsparce's strike and run attack lets us search our deck for up to 3 basic Pokemon and put them onto our bench. In the 2004 meta, decks were based around having support Pokemon on your bench like Delcatty and Magneton that would help you get out the rest of your main attacker line. So Dunsparce being able to search out the Skitties, the Magnemites, and then of course our Mudkips at the start of the game not only thins our deck, but also helps us consistently get our setup. Sudden Flash does 10 damage and 50-50 shot at Paralysis. If you're at the start of the game, it's sometimes nice to have that, to try to buy yourself a little bit of extra time to set up, or later on in the game if you're in a rough spot, just to take that 50-50 Paralysis flip. For the Mudkip, I played 4 copies of the Bubble, and then the Marshtomp 2 copies of the Bubble also. A lot of the same reasoning that I have with Sudden Flash and Dunsparce. If you have Mudkip or Marshtomp in play, and attacking with it seems like a good idea, you're probably either in a bad spot or just trying to buy yourself time to get to a stronger Swampert EX. So the 50-50 shot at Paralysis is a pretty darn good attack for a basic and a stage 1. Next up, we play 2 copies of Swampert from Ruby Sapphire. The Water Call ability lets us attach an extra water energy card from our hand to our active Pokemon once per turn. The attack is 2 water, 2 colorless, 50 damage, auto sleep. The attack is okay, but it's pretty overpriced. So Swampert's going to be more of a bench sitter. That's why we only play 2 copies of it. In certain matchups like Blaziken, you can find yourself attacking with it, but it can be tricky to get it active and with 4 energy on it. Next up, we play 2 Swampert EX. Swampert EX does a little bit of everything right. Starting off, 150 hit points means the opponent will probably have to 2 or 3 shot it. The fighting typing means it gives you a really good matchup against decks like Exploud or Shiftry. The 3 retreat cost is high, but manageable, and the weakness to grass is probably not going to be a factor outside of a random Sceptile EX or Muck EX deck, or the occasional Blossom. Hyper Pump does 20 damage plus 20 more damage for each energy. Basic energy attached to it, but not used to pay for the attack. You can do up to 100 damage this way. So if you have 3, it does 60, 4 is 80, and then 5 is going to be 100. Crushing Wave does 40 damage. Choose one of your opponent's Pokemon, do 40 damage to it. Flip a coin if heads. Discard an energy attached to that Pokemon. I'm always a fan of decks that have built-in sniping like this. It's not a great attack, but you might find yourself in situations where you want to pick off something on the bench, or you find yourself in a rough spot, and going for that 50-50 energy removal is the correct play or a strong play for you. As for the actual damage, Hyper Pump, 100 damage knocks out a lot of stuff in the format. Gorbis, Blaziken, and worst case scenario, you're probably 2-shotting the bigger EXs in the format like Blaziken EX or Gardevoir EX, for example. Next up, we play a 2-2 Delcatty line. Delcatty lets us discard an energy, draw 3 cards. Being able to do this every single turn, along with our normal supporter, gives the deck a lot of consistency. Just a note, I went with a 40 HP Skitty. The attacks are better, but with decks like Exploud in the format, I think you can make an argument to play the 50 HP Skitty as well. Next up, we play a 2-2 Magneton. I split the Magnemites. If attacking with Magnemite seems like a good idea, you're probably in a pretty bad spot in the game. So I like to have the extra options that splitting the line does. Random Spark does 10 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. 10 damage to, choose one of your opponent's Pokemon does 10 damage to it, so active or the bench. This gives us another sniping option in the deck, just in case we get 10 shy of knocking something out. It'll give us a way to be able to hit it on the bench. And then the other Magnemite, Thundershock, 10 damage, 50-50 shot at Paralysis. Not great, but same line of thinking as Sudden Flash or Bubble. If that's an option you need, then it's a good option to have. Magneton lets us discard a card from our hand and search our discard pile for up to 2 basic energy and put them back in our hand. This combos really well with Delcatty and, of course, Swampert's Water Call, along with just making sure we get our normal attachment every single turn. The attack is actually pretty good, too. It does 10 damage for each energy attached to all your Pokemon. This is really strong in matchups against Gorbis because you can pretty easily be knocking out opposing Gorbises, and being able to do it with something like a Magneton instead of having to give them a free shot at your Swampert EX can be a nice swing in prizes. Playing a 2-2 Magneton line also makes it pretty easy, where if you do have to sacrifice one, or if you do have to attack with one and send it up, you're not putting yourself in a horrible spot if it does get knocked out. Next up, I play a 101 Blossom line. I really like Blossom in this deck. One, because we put a lot of emphasis on attacking with Swampert EX, so being able to constantly heal it for 20 damage every single turn can really help keep it alive a lot longer than it probably should be able to. The other thing is a lot of decks in the 2004 format, so like decks that play Desert Ruins would play 2 to 3 copies of Desert Ruins, which means non-Desert Ruin decks that played EXs would have to play 2 or 3 counter stadiums. The issue is there's really not a lot of great stadiums in the 2004 format, so what players started doing, ironically after Worlds, was instead of playing stadiums, they would just play a 101 Blossom line. So between your turn and the opponent's turn, Desert Ruins would add 20 damage to any of your EXs, and then Blossom would just heal that 20 damage off. In matchups where your opponent didn't play Desert Ruins at all, you'd just be healing a free 20 damage off every single turn. With damage outputs being a little bit lower in 2004 than you see in other formats, being able to heal that 20 damage every single turn can really turn, let's say, 2-hit knockouts into 3 or 4-hit knockouts. Outside of that, Blossom is actually a really good attacker in certain matchups. Against Team Magma in particular, you notice the 50 damage will double to 100 and be able to knock out opposing Groudons. I've also had games like against Gardevoir EX or Sceptile EX or Swampert EX where being able to do that 100 damage, the 50 times 2 for 100, is actually pretty impactful in the game. I know those seem like kind of random situations, but they come up a lot more often than you might think just looking at the deck. Next up, we play a single copy of Ditto. So in the 2004 format, Blaziken and Rayquaza EX is obviously probably the biggest or the most played deck in the format. Swampert can really struggle to power through Rayquaza EX since it is both fighting and water resistant. This caused decks at the time to play Crystal Shard, so a lot of Swampert decks in that era would play 1 or 2 Crystal Shards. I prefer to play Ditto because Ditto is a lot easier to search out, and we can reuse it with Town Volunteers. But Ditto's body is each basic energy attached to it counts as every single energy. So essentially you attach 2 energy, usually your normal attachment and then a water call, and you copy Dragon Burst. And then both those energy will say count as fire, so it'll do 80 to the Rayquaza. Ditto's colorless, so it'll double it to 160 and knock out the Rayquaza. This really helps in the Blaziken matchup where you can trade 1 prize for 2, and helps you take positive trades there. There's a lot of other random situations where the Ditto is really good as well. Against Gorbis, you can copy their attack, and it does 10 damage for each Psychic Energy in play. If they have a couple double rainbows, their own Psychic Energy, it's really easy just to one-shot a Gorbis for a basic Pokemon you're putting almost no investment into. I've also had games against Gardevoir, where you can send up Ditto and copy feedback, and if the Gardevoir player is not very careful, you can knock out their Gardevoir EX just using Ditto. Okay, so let's just go ahead and jump on into the trainer lineup here. I play 4 Steven's Advice, 4 Copycat. The 2004 format is known for having some consistency issues. If you don't open Dunsparce Energy, it can be a little bit harder to set up. So I like to max Stevens and Copycat in almost all of my decks. Both let you draw, typically I would say 5 or 6 new cards, and that can take games that you're completely out of, or you just have an absolutely horrible setup and get you right back in the game. Next up, I play 4 copies of Rare Candy. Rare Candy helps us make sure that we get to our Swampert EX really quickly. It also helps us get out Blossom in matchups where we need to get out Blossom. We have a little bit less worry about opposing ATM rocks. It's pretty easy where if we did lose, let's say 2 candies due to 1, we still have 2 different candies to play with. All in all, I just like 4 just for the speed and the consistency. Next up, we play 3 Oracle. Oracle lets you search your deck for up to 2 cards, put them on top of your deck in any order. There's very obvious combos with that and Delcatty. Not a whole lot else to say there. Stacking your deck is really good. It's illegal outside of Oracle, so don't do it, but using Oracle to stack your deck is incredibly good. Next up, I play 2 Friend Ball, 1 Professor Elm's Training Method. I went with 2 Friend Ball, just considering how many different types of Pokemon we play. In almost every single matchup, Friend Ball is going to be live for something. Most commonly, almost every deck in the format plays Dunsparce, so you're always going to be able to use your Friend Ball to copy Dunsparce and search out your Delcatty lineup. Usually in games where you can get your Delcatty set up, the Delcatty is going to be able to help you set up everything else in the deck. Next up, I play one Professor Elm's training method. It's just great in matchups where Friend Ball is not as good, or it can't search for something you want, let's say like Swampert EX. The Professor Elm's training method is just going to give you a little bit extra search. Next up, I play one Pokemon Nurse. I absolutely love Pokemon Nurse in this deck. We are going very heavy on the Swampert EX. It's going to be our main attacker. It's going to be in the active spot most of the time. We do everything we can to keep it alive. I've already talked a little bit about Blossom and Heal Dance, how that affects numbers a lot. Pokemon Nurse lets us remove all damage counters from one of our Pokemon and then discard all energy attached to it. So in the case of Swampert EX, especially when it has attack where you can just, it does damage based off how much energy is attached to it, it's really easy for us to Pokemon Nurse, heal everything off of it, attach for turn, and then use 1 or 2 Water Calls. And we go from having a damaged Swampert EX to a completely healed Swampert EX that's hitting for 40 or 60 damage on that same turn, with the possibility of hitting for 80 or 100 on the following turn, most likely netting us a 2-hit knockout on whatever the opponent has in the active spot. Next up, I play one Warp Point. I always like to play switching cards, especially in a format with a lot of special conditions. I went with Warp Point because it gives us a little bit more flexibility to pick something off on the bench, maybe forcing our opponent to send up something they really don't want to send up, and hopefully netting us a cheap prize in the process. Next up, I also play one Island Cave. Island Cave, when you attach an energy to your active Pokemon, remove all special conditions to it if it's a water, fighting, or metal. I like Island Cave in this deck for a couple of different reasons. One, special conditions are super popular in this format. You'll find a lot of the time that players, if they find themselves in a rough spot, like we talked about earlier, they'll try to do a sudden flash play or something like that, thinking they're going to buy themselves a turn. Island Cave lets you not only get you out of that paralysis, but it also lets you take a greater lead in that matchup. If your opponent's in a situation where they want to come up and use sudden flash, you're probably already ahead in that game, and then Island Cave is just going to help you push you farther ahead in that game. Or if there's a point where maybe it's an even game, they just need to buy themselves a turn, it's going to net you another prize. Next up, the other thing is like I talked about with the Desert Ruins, a lot of decks in 2004 played 3 Desert Ruins, forcing other decks to play 3 Counter Stadiums. When a lot of players switched from playing Counter Stadiums to just playing a Blossom line, you started seeing decks that did play Desert Ruins drop their counts from 3 to, say, 2, and I've seen some decks that play Desert Ruins just tech a single copy in there. So what Island Cave lets us do is we can bounce 1 Desert Ruins. If the opponent only plays 1 Desert Ruins, we're completely in the clear. But if they only play 2, ideally bumping the first one will make it a little bit harder for them to find that second one, and maybe we'll get a couple of free turns where our Swampert EX isn't taking damage at all. Next up, we play a single copy of Town Volunteers. It lets us put 5 basic Pokemon or energy back in our deck. We've played some thin lines in the deck, only 2 Swampert EX, 2 Swampert, 101 Blossom, Ditto, or in matchups where we'd have to attack with Magneton. It's nice to be able to send that back into your deck. I've also noticed in this format, when you're doing a lot of energy drawing and you have big supporters like Stevens and Copycat, where you're copying large hands or drawing a lot of cards in a turn, hand sizes get very big. It's also really easy to get to a point where you might be close to decking out. Town Volunteers gives us a little bit of extra insurance in those situations. And I also like to be able to throw energy back into the deck as well. I know that may seem a little unusual since we play a Magneton line, but being able to get that extra energy back is helpful. And I think my general opinion is that players really undervalue how important that manual attachment every single turn is. It's great when you can play energy acceleration like Swampert, but if you're not making sure that you're getting your manual attachment every single turn, it's not nearly as impactful. Alright, so lastly, let's take a look at the energy lineup. We play 13 energy, 11 water, 1 lightning, 1 grass. The 1 lightning and 1 grass may seem a little thin, but thanks to Magneton, as long as you can get it in the discard pile or see it once per game, you basically have access to it whenever you need to. The grass is for Blossom to attack, and then the lightning will be for Magneton. I also want to note that Hyper Pump is just basic energy, so both the grass and lightning will add an extra 20 damage on Swampert X's Hyper Pump. So very rarely will you ever have any issues with the energy getting mismatched. The 11 water, make sure that we not only get our manual attachment every single turn, but also have a water to use with Swampert's Water Call. The other thing I do kind of want to talk about is a lot of times when players are deck building, they'll try to play as few energy as possible to have more room in both their Pokemon and trainer lineups. 2004, I feel that sometimes you got to be careful not to go too low on your energy. Otherwise, things can get really awkward for you at the start of the game. To open, like, let's say, Dunsparce and not have the energy for the first couple turns is absolutely devastating. Same thing with Delcatty, where let's say you get your Dunsparce off, you have an energy, then you get your Delcatty out. If you don't have that energy to get those first couple energy draws off, you can still find yourself in a really difficult spot. Once you get towards the mid-game, you got a couple energy in the discard, you're using your Magneton every turn, it doesn't matter, but in those first couple turns of the game, you need to make sure that you're playing enough energy that you're going to hit at least 2 or 3 pretty consistently in, let's say, the opening 3 to 5 turns. I like to play 14, so 13 is okay, maybe a little on the light side, but I don't want 14 bad enough that I'm going to cut something else in the deck to play the 14. Alright, so I think that wraps up the deck profile. Let's go ahead and just jump right on into a game and see how we do. Alright, so this is a Swampert game that I recorded earlier tonight. We'll be taking on a Gardevoir deck here. We get a pretty rough opening with just the Magnemite, but we do get our turn 1 energy drop off. So he goes ahead, plays a TV Reporter. He didn't get such a great opening either with the Wobbuffet. Plays a Dual Ball. Grabs Dunsparce. Let's see what else he's got here. Okay, attaches Psychic Energy to Dunsparce. So he does have the Warp Point, so he does get the turn 1 strike and run off. And he goes ahead and grabs, let's see, 2 Rolts here. Alright, so a couple of things. Our opening is pretty bad, but this is why I really, really advocate playing 4 Steven's Advice and 4 Copycat in this format, because a single Stevens or a single Copycat can really get you back into any game when you get such a rough opening. Decks in this format can have some consistency issues until you get the Delcatty Magneton engine rolling, so it's so important to have that early game supporter consistency here. So I also noticed that he did not grab a Skitty or a Magnemite off of his strike and run, so it's looking like he's playing a little bit more of a... Here, we're going to pause this just for a second. It looks like he's playing a little bit more of like a speed variation of the deck, centered around Wobbuffet, instead of the more, I would call it more consistent Skitty, Delcatty engine, along with Magneton. So this play here was a little questionable for me. I did get the Mudkip, and then I had the choice of either sitting back and just evolving up through a Marshtomp, or to go a little bit more aggressive here. I did go for the Swampert play, putting 40 damage on the Dunsparce. My line of thinking for this was that I could either snipe the Dunsparce on the following later on in the game with like a Crushing Wave or a Magnemite, or just knock it out on the following turn. The other play would have been to just try to get an energy next turn and then use the Hyper Pump for 80 if it was still active. This way, this lets us play around a Sudden Flash flip on his part, paralyzing the Magnemite. We had the Island Cave in the hand, so I felt like this was a little bit stronger of a play, but I think it was pretty debatable what was the right course here. Alright, so we do have another Steven's Advice on the following turn. We should be able to net at least 5 here. We have to play the Island Cave to get back to the hand size, go ahead and Steven's Advice. We do get the other energy here. He did flip Tails on the Sudden Flash, so it doesn't really matter. Alright, so we use Friend Ball here, and this is... Alright, we'll pause it again. This is why I think Friend Ball is so good in this format, because everybody uses Dunsparce to set up. So you're almost guaranteed to search out your Delcatty line at the absolute worst. Best case scenario is you're playing other Delcatty Magneton decks and you're able just to have a lot of variation in what you can search for. I would say in almost every matchup, it's an item card that should be able to search out something for free here. Alright, so we'll keep going here. The Skitty, we will have Delcatty on the following turn. We already have the Magnemite, so we just have to find the Magneton. Go ahead, knock out that Dunsparce there. Good news for us was he did miss an energy drop last turn. Brings up Curlia. He's trying to get some damage on the Swampert EX. It might have been better for him just to sit behind the Wobbuffet until he's able to get going here, but he wanted to go a little aggressive. And this for me here is another play where I can either attack the Curlia or I could do a Dunsparce, Warp Point, grab 2 Mudkips, and then try to do a little bit more of a consistent setup here. I think in a lot of scenarios that second option would have been better, just to take the Dunsparce route. But considering the fact that he is an aggressive deck, I don't see anything on his bench. He doesn't really have a whole lot going for him. I feel a little bit more confident going aggressive with the Swampert EX, and then kind of transitioning into more of a slower setup game if I need to. So go ahead, put an energy there. Go ahead, hit him for 60. We do need to be a little bit careful about the Gardevoir EX in either Feedback or Psystorm. In this matchup, you need to watch both the energy counts on both sides of the board and the number of cards in your hand. Neither one of those 2 options would have been enough for him to knock us out. So I felt pretty confident making this play. He doesn't really seem to get a whole lot here. Kind of anticipating that Swampert EX getting knocked out. We do go ahead and make the Dunsparce play here. Just in case he is able to knock this Swampert EX out, and we know what's going to happen at some point. Even a Gardevoir boost energy here. No, that would be Tensai, but we know this is going to get knocked out at some point here. Alright, so we just keep using our Delcatty Magneton engine to try to set up here. Being only Psychic, he doesn't actually leave us a whole lot to grab with Friend Ball. Copycat's going to be okay. Electric Energy can work on the Swampert EX. Hyper Pump is basic energy, not just water energy. Alright, so here comes the Gardevoir EX. Does have the boost energy of the Psy Shadow, or the Psystorm. Go ahead, we're going to bring up the Dunsparce here. We knew this was coming, so we're not too worried about it. A lot of energy in the discard pile. Want to make sure we're not missing an energy drop. Alright. Go ahead and take the Copycat here. Not a whole lot going for us in that hand. We're really looking for the Oracle. It's going to help us make a follow-up play once that Dunsparce gets knocked out. Go ahead and grab Mudkip and Oddish. Surprisingly, the Gardevoir EX is actually weak to grass, and I've had more than one game where I've actually been able to knock out a Gardevoir EX with Blossom, so I know that's going to be an option here. Go ahead, get the Rare Candy Swampert. Playing a lot of rare candies here. I know I do have some risk with ATM Rock here, but at this point I think we've got to take those chances. So something else I just wanted to note really quick here. Before I started doing all of my stuff for turn, I went ahead and used that Water Call power. I knew that was going to be essential that I do that this turn. And Water Call only works with water energy. So you don't want to misclick and accidentally normal attach your water energy and then have something like a lightning or grass energy in hand. So I always use the Water Call first just to make sure I don't mess up. Just by order of operations, you should be drawing your cards first. But always make sure you're double checking yourself and that you're not actually thinking you have an energy or miscounting something and you're going to end up being shy here. Alright, so we're doing a little bit of thinking. We're not going to be able to knock him out. That 40 damage wasn't enough to knock him out, but the 2 energy here and the small hand size means he's not going to be able to do a ton of damage to me. So the game plan is that next turn we can use, between our normal attachment and Water Call, we're going to be able to do 80 damage and knock him out here. One thing I have noticed with this deck, and I talked about it a little bit here, is you just got to be so careful with your energy. There's times where you want to make sure that you have an extra energy to energy draw with. And there's sometimes you've got to pass up using energy draw just to make sure you can get your normal attachment and your Water Call down. Alright, so he sends up Gardevoir here. He's 20 shy. He misses the last boost. He has played 3 this game. So we're going to go ahead. We can just go ahead and knock him out here. We are going to try. Let's see what we're going to do. Knowing the Swampert EX is not going to be able to attack that Wobbuffet, we are going to start working on powering up a Blossom here, just to be safe. Going to go ahead and make sure we got that rare candy on top of our deck. You also got to watch your deck sizes in this format too. If you're using Delcatty almost every single turn, you can put yourself in situations where you can and will deck out. So I really don't have a reason to draw any cards here. I'm perfectly fine just waiting to draw that rare candy. Okay, go ahead, rare candy Blossom. We did retreat that Swampert. We're going to nurse it just to help us play around ATM Rock a little bit more here. Go ahead, attack with Blossom, put 50 damage on him. Yep, and he go ahead and throws out the GG here. It's really, really hard for decks that max out at 50 damage to knock out Blossom. If they're going to hit you for 50, and then you heal 30, or you heal 20, and then they hit you 50 again, they're going to be settling for a 3-hit knockout, where in a lot of situations you're going to heal 2.